Awesome. So put into the chat one word that you are showing up with, feeling a bit of excitement, hope, gratitude. Oh, we're also grateful for you too. Um, really exciting opportunities with this industry, and also we're running our UX Bootcamp course right now with our third cohort, and we're just really excited to be able to create space with some folks over the past few years. And for folks who haven't seen in a little bit, welcome back. We take a summer break with all of our volunteers during the months of July and August as a part of really centering rest in our practice. And then over the past few months in September and October, we've been doing a bit of planning for 2024. So we're really excited to see what is going to shape up with the organization. But before we get started, a quick accessibility check for folks. If you're having trouble hearing us, seeing us, feel free to ping into the chat, or also Kenny here from our org who can help with some technical stuff. And we should also enable. Zoom keeps moving stuff around, but where is this transcription? I don't see it now. Kenny, do you see it?
I think I got it. I just hit
You think so?
show
Oh, there we
captions.
go. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, perfect. Cool. So captions should be enabled for folks who need it, require it, would like it. And also feel free to just type into the chat as we move along through the presentation today. So for the next hour and a half, we have some time for folks to learn more about UX, the industry, how to break into it, where you're at. And also we have some time for folks to connect with one another. And we always love creating some breakout space for folks to get to know one another. Um, don't be shy. But we always love to create space for folks to ask one another questions and get to know one another. So with that, we'll go into our session for today. And before we get into it, can't find, the slides are not here. Well, a little bit about our organization. QTBIPOC Design, for those of you who are new, welcome to our space. We have been running for the past 3, going on our 4th year, online and physical spaces, helping to empower queer BIPOC folks to break into and thrive in the creative industry. And the big ethos of our organization was really thinking about how do we uplift the intersectionality of being both queer and BIPOC, recognizing that it is such an important intersection, especially in the creative landscape, and just seeing over the past few years, right, a big movement in social equity, and a lot of companies saying, well, we're hiring and then we're letting people go. And what we saw a lot of companies saying they wanted to hire, but not really hiring from our communities. But then when all the companies were laying folks off over the past few years, huge swaths of folks in our community being let go. And I think a big part of our organization is really to help bring us together to talk about these important, pertinent issues. And getting into the presentation, boom, boom. First, we just want to ask you, what are you coming into the space with today? Do you have any questions? And I'd love everyone to, maybe for the next minute, just type in something, and maybe intentionality, or maybe a question that you have for our session today. And would love to just ensure that we touch on what brought you into the space and help to answer some additional questions that you might have. So I'll give everyone maybe a minute or two to type in a question or thought that you'd love for today's session to cover, or even your intentionality of what brought you into the space today. UX jobs, applications, interviewing. Free to put into the chat. Yep, we have some networking. Awesome. We'll give some time for folks to write out your questions. Yeah. What are some questions? Some burning questions. Okay, let's go. This is beautiful. We'll still give some time for folks to ask your questions or your thoughts of what brought you into this space today. We have some networking, looking to transition into UI design, front end from full stack development. Yep. Knowing what is the best way to show that you're empathetic during interview process. Best time to apply to UX jobs, on and off season, during hiring cycles. Like to know more about whether a digital presence like LinkedIn is necessary to compete for jobs. Awesome. Maybe I'll give another 30 seconds for any folks. If you have any questions, feel free to place it into the chat. How to put a winning portfolio together, skills as a beginner. Okay, perfect. How do you see integration, emergent technology, AR, VR impact UX field? Learn by experience at Sephora. Awesome. That was so long ago, but sure. Awesome. Okay, feel free to keep putting in questions. Changing the format a little bit today to be a bit more dynamic. I think this style will just make sure everyone's questions, what your burning desires are coming in, we'll be able to touch on it. I think folks asked a lot of really great questions around transitioning into the industry, about the interview process and application, what that looks like, where things are at, how to build your portfolio, which we'll cover today. But I first want to just start off with, so some folks might be completely new to me. So I'll share a little bit about myself and my career journey. I actually have not gotten into the design industry through conventional means. I actually went to college to study biology, wanting to be a doctor. That did not happen. Back a while back, when actually UX as an industry wasn't existing just yet. At the time, you had developers working on programming, there was graphic designers, basically putting together visualizations on computers with Adobe Photoshop. So we use a Photoshop for everything before Figma and Sketch and all these other applications. And I went through the entirety of college actually studying for biology, applying to medical school, taking the MCAT. And the funny story here was that my medical school advisor had mentioned to me there was this hip thing called a gap year that everyone was doing that I should definitely consider as a part of my career. And I took it. And during that year, I actually started to do a bit of freelance work. In the meantime, all throughout college, I was helping different student organizations create their websites, some social media assets, and one thing led to another. I just fell in love with the industry, the work that I was doing, and I was like, oh my God, I just want to continue this. I was in San Diego at the time, jumping between different organizations, working with a recruiter who had placed me at different companies. And it was when I was working over at a agency, a company that does service for many companies seeking design, website development. I just love the culture there. And one thing led to another. I started actually freelancing with them for a bit and then converted over to full time. And then since then, I've bounced between many different cities, went from San Diego to New York, worked in all the big advertising firms in New York City, went from New York City over to San Francisco to work with the tech companies. And then I guess the last part of my life has been really about trying to find a bit more value in just the work that I've been doing. And so left San Francisco, traveled a bit and ended up coming back to New York City and started getting more involved with civic engagement. creating communities such as this. And one thing led to another, started this nonprofit organization in 2020 during the height of many different social activist movements, and also started Stranger Creative, which is our agency. And with that, we've now grown and blossomed to about 12, 13 different folks that we're working with, and a plethora of different clients. And so I think there's just such an amazing opportunity for so many people to work on really interesting challenges, projects. And I guess my own personal kind of love letter or decree to the industry was reshaping it in the way that I really loved and valued it, which was bringing these unconventional backgrounds into the mix. But also, I had worked with all the big tech companies, the really popular ones, right, that everyone go to, and it was just not very equitable, not very inclusive. And a big part of the departure and starting spaces such as this one was really this notion that I think design is very democratic and inclusive for all, but who has been at the design table has not really been inclusive and diverse. And so I think a big part of it, especially for us showing up in this space today, we hold the key to really innovating and reshaping and redefining our industry. Um, and with that, I guess for many folks, you must be thinking, well, where do I get started? There's just so much to do. There's so many job titles, UX, UI. It's so funny. I started, there was no such thing. And you had web developers who were also like full stack, or who knows? There's so many labels for it for the development side. And then you had UX, and people were like, what is that? And now you have UX, you have product design. um, I'll just jump to the next slide. You have UX researcher, UX writer, and you have all the different leveling in between. And it just sometimes it could be a combobulation of all these different titles. My one big takeaway for this and some questions around maybe some of the pathways is really, I don't think people have a clear definition of what it is. That's kind of a bit of a non-answer. But my suggestion here is, I think depending on the company, these different roles that they have will do specific things that, that they think that role entails. And so my biggest suggestion is take a look at the bulleted list of descriptions. Don't get too stuck up on the title and thinking that, a UX designer is the same place everywhere. I actually see even like UX industry has that role. You have some people focusing more on strategy, some people focusing more on visual design and product design, and some people focusing on more of the UI aspect. And so the job description should give you indication of what you're actually going to be doing on the day to day, right? And with this, depending on the different leveling, I think as our design industry matures over time, I think you're going to start seeing a lot of different leveling evolve. But for folks just trying to get a head start, breaking into the industry, my suggestion here is really hone in on what does that day to day look like. And a big part, and here's like a cheat code, right, is really just around having a portfolio that checks a bunch of the boxes that the resume and job application is looking for. And for folks who are like, well, some applications say this, some say this, like da 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 da. My suggestion is take a bunch of the job listings and posts, right, that have the things that you want to do, put it into, let's say, a Figma document, Excel, wherever, right, a scrapbook environment, and try to extrapolate what common job description details exist between them, right? And basically, you just work backwards. Your resume and your portfolio just have to exemplify that you know how to do these things. I think there's a comment here how to put together a winning portfolio. I think, especially if you're trying to break into the industry, the expectation is not having these portfolios, right, that we often see on these award websites. And the reality is, some of these websites that do win awards, the people's profiles they showcase, they're not even the ones that designed or developed it, to be fair. And sometimes we put ourselves to these unrealistic standards. And the reality is, especially if you're coming in as a junior, associate, entry level UX role, the expectation is, can you just do wireframes? Can you just do designs? Can you just be a part of the process, right? And sometimes we are killing ourselves to create these beautiful portfolios, and they're not wrong by any means, but the reality also of a portfolio is to get you to that interview, to get you to that next step, right? And sometimes if you think about the timing of it, does spending 6 months in a portfolio make sense when all it is just getting to the interview, right? And so, if there is a dissonance with you for folks here who have a portfolio and you're not getting callbacks, you're not getting interviews, maybe reach out to folks, ask them questions on some feedback, right? Um, Sometimes they just don't provide feedback. That's all right. But I always say, always encourage folks to just give feedback, whether you're going to get it or not, and see if it is right your portfolio that's missing stuff. Feel free to send the portfolio to a bunch of people and see if any folks have any thought or suggestions to help improve it. But especially, I want to underscore for entry level folks, junior, associate level, the expectation is not to have a beautiful portfolio. It's just to have a portfolio that helps me, if I'm the hiring manager, understand that you can check off some of the job descriptions, right? We do talk in our space when your portfolio actually plays against you. And this is one of those things that, let's say your portfolio website, the development is immaculate and it's just so complex and da 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 da. Or let's say your visual design skill is like really strong, you can actually play against yourself if you're, for example, trying to go into the UX industry, right? But everything else is so strong. What's going to happen is hiring managers and people who you're meeting with, they're just going to say, well, I think you should actually go into this space instead. So we've seen cases where sometimes when you work so hard on these other verticals that aren't necessarily exactly what you're doing, play against you because it's actually showcasing to other people, hey, I'm actually really talented in this regard, right? Same thing also for like a non-digital skill sets. So we see some entry-level folks have like your photo exhibitions, like your art installations and all these other things. I think it's nice to earmark and say, hey, I'm interested in these things, but I wouldn't put like a whole section of your website, for example, right? You're saying, hey, I do UX, but then you have a whole tab dedicated to your acting reel, right? And so I think that's one of the use cases where, especially when you're a junior and associate level, you might not realize that actually curating your portfolio and making sure that what's coming across is like, this is really one, I really want to do this. And two, I have the skill sets to provide. Anything else beyond that, you may potentially distract folks from being honing in on exactly what your capabilities are, right? So that was a suggestion a little bit for the folks looking to transition, especially from development into UI or UX design, award-winning portfolio, and then the empathy piece is funny. It's like how you show it in the interview process. And I think all these portfolios have like, hey, I am a human-centered da 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 designer. And I always laugh. I think there was a UX designer that made a website that was all these like UX tropes. And the first thing was they had a landing page that's like, I am human-centered, da, da, da. And I think, it's just like go straight to the projects. Think about um learning about your projects and your product, explore that as a UX challenge, right? Would you really put this wall in front of people saying you have to look at this like singular statement of who I am before you get into like the details of a project? Not really, right? So it's one of those things to think about and consider. I would say as a part of your combination of like your resume, your portfolio, you definitely want to underscore a few things. The first thing is the hard skills, right? Which is, can I use this design tool? Do I have the capabilities to check off additional like tasks from the job description, right? Can I do a wireframe? Can I do design work, UI work?
can I actually create artifacts, right? Artifacts are representations of deliverables, right? Things that are handed off as a part of doing this work, which could be a user journey, a persona, a strategy, documentation, research, UX writing. What you're applying and what you want to do, that has to go into your portfolio. And if you haven't done it, it's okay. You can put also your passion projects in there, right? What you're excited about into your portfolio. Understand that like your portfolio is really yours to curate. When it comes to the soft skills, this is really around how you're showing up with your presentation and your communication during the process. Especially with also a portfolio, I wouldn't shy away from, like I mentioned, you shouldn't have a separate tab that's like, hey, take a look at my acting reel or, my photos, all this stuff to that extent where people are like, I actually might hire you for that instead. But definitely add some stuff to add a little bit of color into who you are. I think the thing that's most important is your perspective on design. What is that, right? And in our boot camp that we run, we underscore all the time the importance of having a point of view, especially when we're coming in as QT BIPOC folks, queer folks. We come from life experiences that are really valid as a part of the design processes. And sometimes, as a part of trying to break into an industry, we almost tried so hard to conform, we erase a lot of these aspects of us. And so a big part of it could be really thinking about who are you, right? Not just I'm a human-centered designer, I'm a queer BIPOC designer that's really passionate about social equity and thinking about how design can show up, right? How is that? Doesn't that sound so much better, Um, uh, Collaboration. We have a few slides on like whiteboarding tips and industry awareness of just what is happening out in the world, right? And of course, definitely resume portfolio are really important. However, I would say first and foremost, your portfolio is the most important. Um, Feel free to add any other additional comments into the chat as well. Um, uh, if any folks have any other questions. Um, in terms of where to find jobs, I think the mapping is just like everywhere, right? You go to LinkedIn, you go on Working Not Working. Highly actually recommend everyone here to open up an account with Working Not Working. It is one of the directories that has the highest quality design talent. And agencies and companies use to recruit all the time. I wouldn't really focus too much time and attention on Dribble, Behance, and put your portfolio there because it gets lost in the inundation of just like content. But they have job directories that you can check out, AngelList, Product Hunt, Indeed. I would say they're good at just having a pulse on stuff and just kind of understanding and seeing what's coming up, right? Definitely as a part of the process, if folks need to look at salaries, understand where you are, there's a ton of resources available. But the next thing I want to underscore are just the way in. You don't have to just go through job directory. Actually, you should go a little bit backwards, right? There are career fairs that are happening with different organizations hosting it, recruiters, which I highly, highly recommend. Vitamin T, Aquent, Creative Circle. They're really big recruitment firms. Solomon Page, Robert Half, right? And those are really great places to connect with recruiters who want to get you hired, right? Because they take a margin off of you getting hired. And in turn, you get a job, right? Granted, you're not going to get as big of a rate sometimes if you're freelancing, for example. But for those who just need to get your foot in the door, I highly recommend looking for recruiters, creative recruiters specifically. And you can type that into LinkedIn, creative recruiters, and find a bunch of people there. Um, Boot camps, school career coach. So depending on where you're coming in from, you might have access to coaches to kind of help you with the process, right? So folks just coming out of a boot camp curriculum, or folks coming out of education, see if your school does offer that resource. Usually they have that available for folks. And then hackathons, a really great way to create projects, to go into your portfolio, but also realistically, if it's an entry level, associate level role that you're after, 1 to 3 at most is really what you need. I see some entry level folks trying to get like 5, 6, 7 different like case studies, but they're all like kind of, yeah, like lackluster. That actually, again, where your portfolio starts to play against you, because then it looks like you're just trying to amass all of this, right? Without the deep critical thinking. Um, and the last thing I want to put is we talk about this in like a few of our events, but in terms of like where you can go at a high level, there is great opportunity at agencies. There's also great opportunity at product companies. And agencies are organizations that provide services, right, to these larger product companies, a huge IDEO, AKQA. And these companies basically will provide design resourcing, videos, social media, strategic consulting, right? And offer a ton of resources and services to these companies. You'll actually be very surprised at the companies who look like they don't outsource, but they do outsource. Apple outsources a ton of work. Google is actually one of the biggest companies that outsources a ton of work. Meta outsources a ton. And the list goes on. And sometimes these companies will actually bring in agencies to help incubate new ideas as a part of their products. Thinking that if they bring in new people, they'll get a whole slew of different ideas and concepts, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But long story short, I think it really depends on where you want to go work, right? Agencies, you have access to a ton of different clients, a ton of different projects, and definitely fast paced. And for those who want to touch a bunch of stuff and be exploring different industries, I think this is a great space to explore. And for people who really want to go in depth with a certain product, definitely joining a product company is a great option. And the caveat here is, when you join product companies, sometimes you might stay on those projects for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whereas in an agency, oftentimes you might just be on a project for a few months, right? And so the options are pretty amazing. When I first started in this industry, I actually didn't know what exactly an agency was. And the more that I dug into it, I was like, oh wow, this is actually really fascinating. And I personally really loved starting my career there because I was able to get a ton of great projects in my portfolio, but also the energy and the people I was surrounded by. I'm actually still friends to this day, and actually now do a lot of collaboration with some of the people I had first collaborated with like decades ago. Yeah. And so with that, any questions here? And then we're gonna go into portfolio real quick. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to answer the quick question for LinkedIn for competing for jobs. I do think a LinkedIn presence is helpful. The reality is, it all comes down to portfolio first in an order of priority, right? Like portfolio is the most important. And then the next thing is resume. But the issue with resume is oftentimes if you go to a larger company, you're re-inputting all your information into their database. And so oftentimes, like even though you have a resume, sometimes you still have to retype and submit it. The suggestion there is actually whenever you build a resume out, have it in an Excel sheet too. Your resume in the Word doc is actually just pieces from this like Excel sheet that you're pulling and that you can curate the perfect resume for what you're applying for. But the Excel sheet or Google Sheets to just hold the whole database of your job descriptions, your roles, all that stuff is really great because different instances when you do need more context, you can just go back to the Excel sheet and stuff like that to pull. Oftentimes I see people, their main source of truth is their resume, that Word doc. And oftentimes you lose a lot in the process, trying to whittle it down. Then the recommendation of the format is also just stick to one page for the resume too. And for folks who are like, but what do I put on the resume? Definitely try to put most relevant work experiences. So anything that touches, especially if you're looking at UX, right? If you're having any passion projects within the proximity for UX, if you also have any projects that you did that necessarily weren't paid, I think you could put that into your resume as well. Resume doesn't all have to indicate that this was paid. You can basically frame it as these are relevant job experiences. Speak to a deliverable that you worked on an agency that you found really impactful to add to your portfolio resume early career. Yeah, a visual example of how resume Excel sheet look. So that is really just up to you. It doesn't have to look anyway, but it's basically just imagine like you have one column on the left for like the job, like where it was, maybe a column right next to it that's like the time frame, right? The third column, you write all the bulleted information, or you just like paste it in there, right, from your existing job. The fourth column, maybe highlights from it, right, that you want to speak to, or impact, right? So it's really, see it as something that you can just use yourself, but think of it as a repository that ultimately you can just pull information for, whether it's for a resume that you have to build, a cover letter, right? It becomes a great place to just like archive information. Speaking to deliverable and agency impactful, I mean, I would say one thing that shows up time and time again is some of the work that I had done early on with MasterCard when I was over at Sapient. And during that time, what was I? I was a senior UX designer, and I was basically leading the team with one other person. We had visual designer, we had copywriter, and we basically ideated and created this concept of a financial application that was all language based. And this was a while ago, and realizing even today, just had met with one of our old clients earlier this year, and she was just like, oh yeah, like we worked on it almost a decade ago, but it's still really relevant today. And I think that's something I always refer back to, because it's one of those things where when you do solve core issues, you can potentially create very timeless designs, right? And a big premise of that product that we had created was doing a ton of research into understanding how people had talked about finances with one another, and the way we talk about money, how we pass down historical memory of money, is really based on language. And at that time of my career, I was just really hungry to also create something that was really innovative, really interesting. And we got rid of, in this financial application, our concept was getting rid of all bar charts, all pie graph, all these things that you would see in a quintessential financial fintech application. And we just replaced it all with language, sentences, natural language patterns. And it was so interesting. It was so beautiful. And unfortunately, it didn't end up getting launched because there's a bit of issues with development and finding the right development partner for it. But just as a proof of concept, I think that was just a really great opportunity to explore just how design can be a way that we really rethink and reshape products as we know it. And also time at Sephora, did a ton of work there with the Sephora virtual artist. So that was the product in which you could just bring your phone using the augmented reality front camera of your phone, augmented reality layer, and it would just apply makeup onto your face. And people might think it's really easy. It's like, hey, just create these swatches and it goes on your face, but it's actually really complex, where there's a whole color palette and makeup, right? lipstick, eyeshadow, depending on the brand and depending on the type of color, it has different hues and pigments and, like sheen or lack of sheen, like really thick and bright sometimes with the color. The way that it's applied is so different that, and also depending on skin tones, that the company behind it that had created all of these different use cases. So even for like a singular lipstick with maybe like a color, depending on the skin tone, it would actually change the hue and the way that it would show up on other people's faces. And so they would actually do this across different makeup lines. And it was such a fascinating technology that while it looked really simple, the whole premise behind it was ensuring that the businesses and the way that they were swatching the products were as realistic as possible. I think with that one, they ended up getting rid of the product only because the vendor Modiface ended up getting acquired by L'Oreal. And so that's a big competitor for Sephora. And I do think they're maybe in the process of making or bring it to life again. But again, right, that's a great example of how we democratize access to makeup. And they were using virtual layering to allow people to see what certain makeup or makeup combinations looked on your face, which was really quite fascinating. What was also really cool with that platform was the tutorials. I don't think they did a good job kind of showcasing it or getting marketing around it. But basically, imagine you have makeup, right? And you would just layer it as like, Snapchat filter, Instagram filter, it just shows up. But the way that they created the tutorials, you could actually see like, and they would have like arrows showing and guiding you kind of like, hey, now like you move the brush in this direction across your cheek and you'd actually see the color kind of like seeping in. And I thought that was quite fascinating way to kind of visualize a makeup tutorial directly on your face. Yeah. Um, thank you, Alfonso. So going into setting up portfolio and resume, I think this is the the biggest issue with most creatives. I think you see a lot of perfectionism coming up, right? With a lot of issues with like trying to have this thing that is going to outcompete everyone. But the reality is, one, I think this is great advice. But the less you can think of this as competition, but really about how are you shining, right, in the best way possible, I think you're going to feel a lot more compassion in this process. I think when you're always comparing yourself to others, one, like you don't have the full context of what's happened around you. And so you don't know what's gone into creating that other person's website, right? And other person's work. And sometimes people, like frankly in the creative world, just like steal other people's work and they just like put it up on their website, and so you don't know who's actually done what a lot of the times. And the other part is just when it comes to people that you're starting to look at for quote unquote inspiration, right? I think you should look at people at your same level, right? And why I underscore that is oftentimes you see a lot of entry level designers try to copy, right, the portfolios of those people who are much more senior. And I think that's where this whole I am a dot 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 started as a trend, because you have a lot more senior people use that in a way to identify themselves in a market, right? And saying, this is what I do, and this is what I'm a specialist at. And when entry level people are coming in and they're like, well, I see these like really senior people do it, let me also try to mimic it, but I don't have the job experience, da, 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 da. And then that I think is like a pattern that was created because you saw a lot of people who were just taking it as just like, well, if I see them doing it, I should do it. But again, right, I think what you should be looking at is, let's say if you were running a company, right, and you were hiring an entry level UX person, right, not a senior person to an entry level position, like no, 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 because your budget can't afford that, right? So let's say you have an entry level person's budget and you had to find someone to fill it. Who would that be? Right? Especially if you're trying to break into the industry, and find those portfolios, right, that are at that same level as you, right? I keep underscoring that because I think we oftentimes set these huge milestones that are way too convoluted sometimes for ourselves. And I think we could be easier on ourselves. I really do. I'll jump between a few just like tips here. Depending on where you're at in your journey, if you don't have a portfolio, highly recommend opening an account with Working Not Working, or if you want Behance. But definitely you want to think about ultimately getting your own portfolio or website, right? A .com, a .domain to actually put your stuff in. What I also recommend for like a layout perspective, right? But if you want to have, let's say, a template for your website, a stack that I highly recommend and that I use across a lot of different websites is having a .com with hosting. We use what do we use? SiteGround, very cheap, and we have a WordPress installation on it, and we have Sempless as a WordPress template that we've purchased. And Sempless is really great because it only has a one-time fee for the template, and so you're not having to pay like monthly costs over and over and over to maintain a website. Yeah. Whereas Squarespace, you do have those monthly costs. My recommendation, and understanding that folks in our community, right, we're all under resourced, especially financially too. And if you're really struggling to figure out the financing to pay for some of these things, start with a Working Not Working, right? Just get your stuff out there, start connecting with people, right? And then maybe that could be a goal later on. But you should not, you should not be breaking the bank. To put yourself in a not great financial situation so that you can get some of these things up and running, balance, right? In terms of projects, my recommendation, especially for folks trying to break in, is just honestly like 1 to 2 really strong projects is all you need. And the goal should be that, right? If you finish a project, you can always keep iterating on it, right? Technically, just in your own accord, right? And so focus on highlighting some of the stuff that you want to be doing more of in these projects, right? And then lastly, I want to underscore this. You need to assess how much time you have available realistically and setting expectations to get there, right? I see a lot of entry level people say, and they have these like really world class stellar portfolios, and they're like, okay, I really want to do this, but I have 2 hours a week. Like, okay, let's say that portfolio, they hired someone and they paid them to work over like 100 hours, total to develop it. Let's say you're spending 2 hours a week. That's going to take you 50 weeks, which is almost a year to do it, right? So this is where I think compassionately, as your, as your auntie, be realistic and set realistic goals. Yeah. And break work into manageable chunks. I think this is a big one. You have to be breaking work into what you're going to accomplish when you sit down. If you're sitting down only for 30-minute sessions, your goals can only be for that 30-minute session. Yeah. I think that has been a huge kind of change to even my own self productivity, is realizing like these checklists, that things that we set to accomplish, they're great, right? But if we're not making progress towards it and we're just holding it, you have to also ask yourself, is it my ego? And this is why I want to hold on to these goals and it just makes me feel good. Sure, hold on to it all you want, right? Print it out, put it somewhere, right? But if you really want to make actionable steps towards it, you can still have that, but you need to break them out into smaller steps so that during the session, you can actually work towards accomplishing that, right? A goal should not also be, I'm going to finish this case study tonight. Unless you're really going to, I have a rule of thumb where if I set a goal and I do 3 sessions and in those 3 sessions I don't complete it, there's a dissonance between the goal that's been made and the sessions, right? I either have to change what I'm doing in the session or change the goal, right? But that's my recommendation, is if you're setting a goal and you're not hitting that goal that you're saying for that session, and it's been 3 sessions, or you set the goal and you want to do it, but like maybe 3 days has passed and you haven't touched it, that means your goal is in serious need of a little love and a little adjustment. Yeah. Does this resonate? Oops. Okay. Just some quick tips. Portfolio showcases your work. What's really great is it's always on, so it always helps people learn more about you. Interview cheat sheet. This is a really good one that I don't think we really think about, but as you're showing your portfolio, you can just literally walk through what you put in it, right? So if you're interviewing and you're showcasing your portfolio, but you're saying something completely different in the interview, like that stuff needs to go into your portfolio, right? And vice versa. And so see the portfolio as a way that you're highlighting the stuff that you're going to talk through in the interview, right? And then lastly, see as an opportunity to celebrate the hard work that you've put in. The people that visit it, again, is also not you. Sometimes we see a lot of people create portfolios for other designers, but the reality is like the people who are looking at it are not designers. So I think you give yourself some grace. Recruiters, hiring managers, sometimes they're not necessarily in the design industry, they're just recruiters, right? Your clients, your peers, family members, sometimes they have no idea what you do. So I think you can give yourself grace and just allow it to be a lot simpler than you think. The big tip of how to build your portfolio is think about it as a movie, a start, finish, and or start, middle, and end. And you really want to build up the narrative of it. Yeah, we do a lot of this work as a part of our boot camp, where we're starting to think about this journey and this arc of the story. Right, the beginning. What problem are you trying to address? How are you thinking about addressing it? What was your role in it? Right, the middle. What are you actually doing? What is your process? Who did you collaborate with and how? The end, what was the outcome? What would you do differently? Right. And thinking about all the pieces that show up, you have to address it in each portion, right? If you state a challenge and a problem in the beginning, but the middle and end does not touch on it, there is an opportunity right there to identify a thing that you can improve that would dramatically impact your interview and also your presentation of your portfolio, right? If you're also stating and interjecting something in the middle that was not even presented, right, in the beginning as something that was your problem, right? And then all of a sudden just disappears in the end, you've identified another gap, right? And so think about artifacts, right? These deliverables, personas, and all these things, almost like characters, right? That show up in a movie. When the characters show up, there needs to be a reason why they came into the picture, right? And there needs to be a reason if they do exit or if they have a finale, like what was the development of them, right? And so think about all the little pieces as characters as a part of this movie and the plot, and they need a reason why they've shown up, right? They need a little bit of like how they develop and kind of a showing of where they ended up, right? Hopefully that's an easy way to start like visualizing it. And when that starts to make sense, then when you go into the interview, right, you're just talking about the movie, the plot, right? And the way that you just break apart the portfolio, quite simply, is just beginning, middle, and end. Super simple. Yeah. And I think we're sometimes overthinking it beyond like, and we're using these like case studies to our detriment sometimes, the ones that are like so long, and we're like, oh my God, I won so many awards. It's winning awards, but is it getting interviews? Who knows, right? But really, the beginning, this one is just asking or framing the ask and challenge right in the background, and what is the context of the work, right? Who is the client? This should be maybe at max like 100 characters, right? Like not 100, like maybe like 300 characters, 100 words, right? It should not be long at all. I need to be able to read this in 30 seconds, right? The middle, this is where it gets meaty, right? Show me what are the artifacts that you created and maybe how you iterated on it, right? How it went from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, right? And then the end, show me the outcome. Sometimes we index so much on the end and the beginning, but really UX in particular is all about the middle. The end should take me maybe 30 seconds to a minute to talk through. The beginning, 30 seconds to a minute to talk through. The middle should be really where it's meaty. Yeah. And a quick piece of feedback, which is how we're creating. Also, this could apply for anyone who wants to get into content creation and anyone who wants to just create and put stuff out there. We have two modes the way we work. Oftentimes we are in creating mode versus editing mode. But the reality is when we sit down and we do work, our mind usually wants to stay in one of the modes, right? We're creative, we're thinking about all these ideas, we just want to capture it. Editing is when we just sharpen the knife, right? We hone in on what we want to do. So the suggestion here is maybe you sit down specifically to your portfolio, you sit down, you start writing everything that's on your mind, right? With a portfolio, like, oh my God, this is in my mind, da, da, da. The key here is you cannot edit, you cannot delete. The instant you're deleting, you're instant tweaking a word, you're all the stuff, that is editing, right? You can do that later. You can refine it later. But you have to give yourself that free flow and just allow yourself to spit everything out that's in your mind. Because the minute you start getting into the editing mode, you really do shift your mindset a little bit and you shunt the creation. And so this has been also a big part of just like how I've been like really productive is I do keep and suspend these two worlds separate. Granted, sometimes I procrastinate and it's awful. And so I'll be like, okay, I have to do this. But when I do procrastinate, I'll even say, okay, in my working session, I'm going to just give myself creation for 15 minutes, right? And then I'm going to edit in this separate time. But you have to think about how you're splitting this up if you're going to make your editing also really successful, right? How can you go into creation mode when you ideate and you're like, da, 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 and then in that same mode, you're coming in, right, to tweak and all this stuff. You have too much context and too much in your mind of like what you're trying to accomplish that you might be like not be able to see, right? When have you written an essay before and read it like a week later, like, what the heck did I write? Right? And it's the same thing. Editing, just take a step away, right? Allow yourself that grace and then come back and refine, right? This is usually the key that helps a ton of people. Yeah. And then I'm just going to wrap up real quick with some feedback and then we could go into open Q&A. In the interview process, something to think about is who are you interviewing? Where are you in the interview process and type of questions? Especially when it comes to who are you interviewing and where you're at, usually in the beginning stages are really not the designers, right? And so asking these like specific questions about like, how do they use Figma and da 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 da, they're just trying to figure out, can you make a wireframe, right? Those are the things that you need to check off in the first interview. And then later on, then you can answer some of the more technical stuff, right? But the type of questions, it just gets simply split up into three types, quite simply. Your background, who are you, right? What are you coming to the table with? Technical, what are your capabilities? What can you create, right? And behavioral, if you're in a certain situation, how would you behave? How would you solution? How would you collaborate, right? And as a part of all of this, I think you'll start to see some interviews pop up. I have so many thoughts about whiteboarding. I think sometimes they're just like sometimes not the best, but if it does show up, my big tip with whiteboarding here is really think out loud the entire process, talk out loud what you're doing, bring people in to collaborate. Sometimes people are so fixated on solving and like creating a best product that whiteboarding is really more about the soft skill. Really, it's more about the soft skill rather than the hard skill, right? And so during the whiteboarding, they're looking at, hey, can I work with this person realistically, right? Can I collaborate with you? Do I want to work with you? That's the question that they're trying to answer during that time, right? And lastly, I would say just with the interview piece, before, during, and after, just some quick tip. Before, definitely prep, definitely do some research of the interviewers if you haven't been doing so already. I think that will give you indication of who are you talking to, right? Is this a designer or not designer? Are they really interested in a specific thing, right? Do they work on a specific product that you can ask questions around? And that research will help you during the interview process ask questions that can really engage them in conversation, right? And also give you an indication of what you need to highlight as a part of the talk, right? For example, if I had this talk today and we just specifically focus on just really nitty gritty Figma, tutorial on how to make a profile, I think some of you folks would be like, what the heck am I doing, right? And so that's really a big part of the research that we do, is so that we can show up in the meeting and connect with people and find commonality, right? That's what you want to do. And then afterwards, I want to underscore this all the time. I know it might seem like, like, why do I do this? But definitely send a thank you message or some sort of message right after the interview. It's just a really good practice to just like instill, and it makes a huge difference on just like what it makes you seem like a eager, eligible candidate in the process. Yeah. Um, let's see what else. I think we had a few questions. Okay. Best way to show you're empathetic during the interview process. I think so. Typically, an interview is about 30 minutes long. That's what we're seeing in the industry. And during the 30 minutes, you should really be talking about 10 to 15 minutes of that time. The other 15 minutes should be them talking and asking questions. If you want to just be about empathetic to them as a collaborator, let's say that, right? It is really, how are you creating space for them to engage with you during the interview, right? If it's empathy for, let's say, your product, your users, that should be a part of your design and how you're talking it through, right? But really, a big part of also our boot camp, and why we also have students go through the process of presenting a lot of design and all their work, and like we add these constraints of like it's got to be in like 5 to 10 minutes, is because that is a reality. You're never ever going to have an hour to present your whole case study. 9 times out of 10, what happens with a lot of UX designers is you get through maybe 10% of your case study and then the interview is done. And so I also want to underscore, the interview is not about showing how much work you did. It is about showing people you can do the job. Yeah. It is not showing how much work you did. It's not showing how much busy work you've been able to accomplish. It's quite literally showing people that you have the capabilities to check boxes, right? And sometimes before, let's say you have multiple case studies, I actually like to ask, hey, I actually have a lot of case studies and some of these span across different categories. What are you interested to hear more about, right? If I'm in a scenario when I have maybe 1 to 2 case studies, what I would actually do is I'm going to go, hey, I'm going to just like talk through my case study at a high level, go into some of the points, and I love to open up to have you ask questions. And I want to reserve a lot more of that time for that discussion, right? And then you just go through it. If an interviewer peeps up during the interview, you should not be just ignoring it and just like ramming through the interview. You should stop and immediately just like ask them, yeah, like what's up? Even if they're cutting you off the interview. Granted, that might be a part of other things, other signals, but be open to collaborating with the people you interview with, just like how you could shape the interview. Yeah. Let's see. Best time to apply to UX jobs. So right now, I would say it's just a really tough time given the holidays. And so my recommendation is, if there's still interviews and stuff that you want to just get out, feel free to do so. I would say take a look at when jobs have been posted. I think in this day and age, you just have to just get in the practice of being okay with rejection, right? And just apply, move on, and just keep going at it, right? Definitely there's other unconventional methods that we highly recommend, like setting up coffee chats, talking to people. I actually I actually recommend, connecting with folks even if they don't have a job available to you, because you never know who can connect one opportunity to another. And sometimes I've seen entry level folks who have been referred over to me, for example, right? And I'm like, they'll ask me straight up, hey, do you have a job open? I'm like, no, I don't, right? And I've had some entry level folks actually decline connecting with me, learning and chatting. And I'm like, sure, right? But you never know who can also connect you into the ether to everyone else. One recommendation that I got that was really helpful was at the end of informational interviews, feel free to ask folks, hey, I really enjoyed this conversation. Are there any other folks that you think that would be great for me to connect with? And that can give signal to other people to help, kind of boost you to the people that they think could be properly aligned for you. And so that's my recommendation, is sometimes you have to kind of just like take a step back and look at the bigger picture to see other opportunities. Yeah. Integration of emerging technologies like AR and VR impacting UX field. Um, I think there's so many different facets of it. And my question back to you is, what are you interested, right? What are you interested to pursue, to go after? And I would just focus on that, versus it's about like what they would call like a land grab. I hate using these war terms, but they say in that, where imagine you're just like an individual, you see all these opportunities, and you're just trying to just grab and hold on to as many things as you want. Worst comes to worst, you get everything, but at the same time, you get the stuff that you don't want to do. You're just going to be an instant where you're just like, I hate it, right? And so, my recommendation is totally understand, especially for intro level folks, you might not know exactly 100% what you're going to do, but my recommendation is have at least a slight understanding of like what you're really interested in, right? And be able to articulate why you're interested in that, and then use that as an opportunity to maybe talk through slash find opportunities that are most in alignment, right? But going back to how these industries are actually going to affect the UX field, I think specifically for AI, it is going to radically shift our industry in a way that, and also if these are interesting, we highly recommend coming to our next month's talk, which is a State of Equity, which is an annual event that we host in December, where we bring really amazing folks to come talk about, just totally uncensored, about the future of equity, 2024 beyond, and also the state of equity in 2023. And we saw, definitely, I think it's going to be a heated conversation with a lot of insights, but we also don't record it because just a lot of amazing things are shared that we just want to protect some privacy around. And so if stuff like this is interesting, definitely check out our talk next month. But specifically around AI and VR, AI is definitely going to move more into the back seat in the future. And right now, I think everyone's really more interested in like technology capabilities. And we oftentimes see this when technology is emerging out, right? Like, let's say responsive websites, when they first launched, everyone was really keen about like the responsiveness and the detail of like all these things. And now people are like, yeah, just do it. And technology sits in the background. And I do think AI in the future is really just on how does it empower the design and the upfront, right? The front end interface, and that experience, not leading it. I think a lot of what we see today, my prediction is like the chat-based interfaces are all going to dissolve. Like it's so hard to use a chat-based interface to leverage the technologies. You don't know what capabilities are there. You have no context. And it's just like, how do you save like your output? Like it's just it's like a very developer-centered output. And I think when design starts to take over the industry and landscape, which is in the future, I think you're going to start to see AI integrated in a more human-centered way. VR, I don't think it's necessarily the most equitable, to be honest. And I think VR, the accessibility it's just tough, right? It depends on site. It depends on just having a camera so close. And it's just, uh, I think a lot of the way that they're selling it, like you can work in it, it's just like, it's just tough, right? Like, do you want to be in front of a screen, especially with the Apple goggles? A lot of people are saying it's going to change the industry, and we're going to definitely talk about this next month. But I think it's going to become a lot more niche, to people who actually need it, right? Maybe in like a doctor's clinic, or they're reselling Google Glasses again right now for different industries. And you're also seeing it where people who don't have access to use both hands at the same time or have space. So people in like shipping facilities, right, who do need access to a computer, they're seeing glasses and this whole aspect of like augmented reality be really useful because their hands are full slash they don't have a station for a computer. But for folks who have access to like a phone, a laptop, a computer on a regular basis, it's just like I don't know necessarily how VR is somehow going to be so starkly different, right? Thank you for dropping the link, Ivan. Okay, so we're at 8:12. I wonder if any folks have any questions. Any other questions from some folks? Yeah. Semplice, Semplice, Semplice. I think it's about like 40, $50 for the template. But if you can spin up like a WordPress instance and just install it, it is the best interface for any WordPress template I've seen. And they have amazing templates. And my recommendation is you can actually look at case studies who use the Semplice template and quite literally work backwards to create it. It's just like such a no-brainer way to get something like beautiful out the door without really thinking it through too much. Yeah. What companies are currently hiring UX designers and what sectors are demanding the highest? Honestly, I think UX and just designers in general. So product design is a really popular title that's coming up. And I would say more and more industries are requiring it. Think about all the industries that have been like brick and mortar or just physical, right? Not digital. And they go digital aside from like technologists to help implement it, they need designers to help create that look and feel, right? And so medical companies right now are doing a lot of work innovating because there are deadlines around digitizing medical records, right? So that whole industry is shifting. In the finance tech, fintech space that's always evolving, right? Not necessarily, I have so many thoughts about like cryptocurrencies and blockchain, but just regular financing, right? I think the way that people transact, spend money, save money, budget, all that stuff, a ton of innovation, starting to integrate AI for some insights for folks, right? I think another great industry is even like the nonprofit sector. We're seeing a lot of innovation in that space where they're starting to mature their design practices. So a lot of nonprofits that have been operating previously are starting to go into digital sectors, really maturing the digital capabilities, right? I think we're not even close to seeing like UX industry at its peak. Though I will highlight, there's just a lot of people in the industry coming out of all these boot camps. My recommendation is really niche yourself down to maybe a few sectors and things that you're interested in and allow yourself to really dig deep, right, into that space and try to see if you can find anything that comes out of it, right? Because I think if I were starting in the industry, I would get a little bit frustrated with just so many opportunities, right? Talk about or show the impact of a design project. My recommendation with showing the impact of a design project is this answer that's like a non-answer, but sometimes people are like, ugh, you have to just do it in front of other people, right? Usability test it. And you just have to like prepare it. And aside from like the basic framework of it, you've got to just like run that presentation or that talk in front of somebody else and just get their feedback on it. And I think it's going to help you see exactly maybe like where you might not be highlighting, right? Or the way that you're starting to articulate some stuff, you might be jumping over some stuff that are really important. How do you get into the beauty industry? That's my goal. Should my portfolio be beauty theme or is it more about design process? To be honest, at this point, I think a lot of people are really open to UX designers that come from a myriad background, right? My recommendation is maybe think about the maturity of certain companies and position yourself to find the ones who are looking for, if you're just trying to get into that industry, entry level roles, right? So it could be, let's say, a design company, they've had their first initial designer. Usually it's hard to come in as like the very first designer because they're oftentimes looking for a lot more senior designer to establish like a lot of stuff that you might not know. But look for companies that are just like that next level, right? Where they've already set some of that design practice up, but they just need somebody to help them, right? Like churn out work, get to the next level, right? So I would look for startups where they have some designers already on staff, but they're just waiting to get to that like next level where they just have more people helping, like check off boxes with design, right? Also look for larger organizations that have some of that capability, but they just need, again, people to help them like make it even bigger, right? Maybe start in the beauty tech startup, right? Beauty tech, and I would also do information interviews with people in the industry already, right? Yeah. Cool. Thanks for hopping on. I know we went over. I think we're okay because we're just answering questions. Um, yeah, it seems like we are nearing at the end of time. So why don't we just do this? Let's have folks, we'll do our closing announcements real quick before folks hop off. And definitely, I'd love for folks to like just, if you want to drop like your LinkedIn into the chat and then connect with one another, that's great. We also have our Slack channel, which I'll show real quick. And so for folks who are interested, definitely sign up for our Slack channel. Where folks can communicate, chat with one another. Yes, that's the URL. For folks who are interested to connect with people to give you feedback, we're actually hosting a UX night / portfolio review on December 13th next month. So if you're interested, please email us at info@qtbipoc.design. Spots are limited, so email us ASAP if this is of interest. Totally free, and depending on number of reviewers we get. Last year when we held it, we had everyone have, I think each person got to connect with maybe a recruiter or design leader for 30 minutes. And then we had the design leaders set up 2 sessions with folks. And so a really great opportunity to connect. And then lastly, we have 2 speakers confirmed. We may add a third one, who knows, where we're going to highlight our next UX night, and we're going to chat a little bit more about really the state of equity as a whole. It's been such a beautiful conversation that we've had year over year. And for folks who really want the tea of what's happening, we highly recommend you come join us. Yeah. Awesome. Yes. So I highly recommend. So everyone, if you could just drop in your LinkedIn, connect with one another, send a message to connect with each other. I'll give everyone maybe a minute now to just drop it in. Just grab each other's links, connect with each other. Yep. Drop your links. Yeah, great. And connect with each other. And my recommendation is I would just first start off with a coffee chat with each other, and just check out what each other you're working on and get to know one another, right? And this whole, a big ethos of our organization is really about community, and you get to build the community that you want to be a part of, And so if folks have Instagrams, LinkedIn, things that you think are really interesting, send a message. The worst that could happen is you're in the same place that you are. That's all, right? Yeah. Drop your LinkedIn and please connect to each other, and see maybe that as your little homework coming out of today's session, and to see what each other are working on. Awesome. That's it. Any other announcements? Kenny, Ivan? Okay, awesome. So Kenny is going to take us away with a ballad song. Um, just kidding. So I think we can just close early. So it's 8:22. Let's give some time back for folks, unless if there's any other questions. Happy to stay on for a few minutes. But wherever you are, I think it's getting late for folks. Have a good rest of your night. Get some rest. Be excited about the end of this year. Seasons are changing, and during seasonal change, we have to be a bit more compassionate and gentle with our bodies, because our bodies are a little sensitive to just everything that's happening. And so, hopefully, you can take this time to get some rest. Awesome. So with that, yeah, definitely drop in your LinkedIn, and then we'll close early for tonight. Give some time back for folks. Yeah. Sorry we didn't get to the networking though. But yeah, that's where I recommend like connecting with folks to one another on LinkedIn and then get connected. Okay. Awesome. So with that, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to stay on. But our night is now officially closed. Thank you all tonight. See you next time. Bye bye. Good night, everyone.